So what I've tried to do over the last 4 or 5 months is really spend a lot of time in conversation with these objects, asking what kind of energy do I need to give you, the object, in order to wake you up again? What's necessary for the life of power embedded in this wooden goat or this African fetish? What's necessary in order for that charged power that it had to be made available again? So the title of the show is A Complicated Relationship Between Heaven and Earth, or When We Believe. And I think that in some ways that tension of material culture having a consequence in things that are not of this world, or like how things beyond the things that we can see in some way need to be embodied, whether that's spiritual belief or psychological power or secret societies. And so in some ways the goat, which is represented in the show, it's a Freemason's device. Maybe its full use is a little bit questionable, but we do know that it was part of an informal set of practices that would take an initiate from one stage of acolyte into another stage. These ideas of ritual and sacrifice and rites of passage, I feel like they're things that we often discard, but that those rituals are always happening in one way or another. And so I think that I've been trying to just wake some of that up. I've also thought, how could I borrow these ritual objects that were made for one set of devices toward my own devices? And so in this case of the Freemasons' bucking goat, I wanted it to become not only a point of informal hazing, but maybe even a way of contemplating the notion of a secret, or the notion of the world's secrets held by a small elite set. That, is there something that the goat could reveal by me concentrating on it that's much bigger than the goat in its material form?
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
The video work that I've done is a work of me and a gentleman named Billy singing Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace is an important hymn in the tradition of gospel music, but it's also in this context one form of power. So that if you have this kind of African reliquary, you have this European secret society, and you have God's grace, a kind of Christian ethic. And that those three things together constitute kind of forms of power. And those forms of power, in a way, are always questioned. And then, in some ways, the framing device for me is actually this object behind me. That there's a way in which there are perspectives of where power comes from and how big power is. And so I think that I was also very interested in how power gets framed by other forms of power. Right? And so there are these elements of, like, say, salvage and salvation, redemption and the reclaimed. And I think that my work is always trying to grapple with questions of, is it possible for the material form to gain power, not because it's beautiful, not because of its kind of use value, but because of the amount of care and labor and power from the maker embedded in it. And so when you look at these material objects, it is rarely that they are powerful in and of themselves, but that they were wielded to power by a maker. And that's exciting.